on the theories surrounding the attacks on September 11th. Radio talk show host Alex Jones and a retired Air Force colonel present their views from this event held in Los Angeles. It's close to 2 hours.
And I'm the organizer and presenter of the conference we've been having for the last day. We're now into the second day, 9/11 and the neocon agenda, facing the facts. I would like to thank all of you, some of you who've traveled from as far away as Germany and Canada and one person from Australia, for being here. I've talked to people from as far away as Vermont and, of course, a lot of great people from right here in Los Angeles. I would also like to thank C-SPAN for being here and covering this event. C-SPAN has been really the only outlet on national television that hasn't just shown small portions or had speakers exposing 9/11 as an inside job on for just a few minutes. They have covered quite a few presentations by David Ray Griffin and others, the 9/11 Truth Convergence. And so, again, they really need to be commended. Thank you, C-SPAN. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes, then we're going to introduce our panel and give them all a 5-minute opening statement. Then we're going to open it up to a general discussion about 9/11 and the unanswered questions and the clear evidence of black op, black world involvement in the tragic attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. And then later, I believe we'll have time for about 15, 20 minutes of questions. Long before 9/11 took place, I was fully aware of the historical fact that governments, Western governments, Eastern governments, the U.S. government, elements of it, normally small criminal elements, have staged terror attacks or have manufactured different pretexts to invade countries, attack nations, or enslave their own domestic populations with police-state measures. And so, opening this up today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of state-sponsored false flag terrorism. Even the CIA's own website, CIA.gov, in their history department admits, and 14 books, scholarly books, have been published, including one by Kermit Roosevelt himself, where our own government admits that in 1953 they staged false flag terror attacks and riots, shootings, to blame it on the president, the elected president, Mossadegh. That's part of the record. And then we have declassified documents like Operation Northwoods from the early 1960s that was green-lighted all the way up to Kennedy, and President Kennedy said no to Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods in late 2000 was actually covered by ABC News and the Baltimore Sun. You can read the document itself, the National Security Archive, and the Library of Congress online. Just type Operation Northwoods into Google. And I say that for the TV viewers out there because this is really a foundational document. In it, the Pentagon and General L.L. Eminster, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, proposed, not as a war game, but as an operational plan that they wanted to implement as a pretext to go to war with Cuba and then perhaps the Soviet Union, widening it, a cocktail, a cornucopia of false flag events that would kill and wound individuals, American citizens, and then other events where they would claim Americans had died where none had died. And one of the 5 different terror attacks they discussed that they could carry out to blame on a foreign government is the hijacking of a jet by remote control and crashing it, and then having a list of dead Americans, preferably students, to create a catalyzing event to get the public angry and behind a war effort. You can go read this in Operation Northwoods. They're proposing it. Also in Operation Northwoods, they talk about blowing up a ship in Havana Harbor, similar to what happened to the Maine in 1898. They talk about having Cuban Americans from the Army dressed up like the Cuban military and attacking the U.S. Marine Corps base at Guantanamo Bay, blowing up the ammo dump, firing mortars, and yes, shooting our servicemen. This is official, this is declassified, this is public. They also discuss staging sniper attacks in Miami and D.C., plastic explosive bombs. It's all discussed in there, and Kennedy, when he found out about the plan, said absolutely not. And we know what happened to John Kennedy just a little over a year later. There are hundreds of these examples. Now, there are other false flag events where people are not killed. We now have the declassified documents. The official CIA and NSA historians have admitted that the Gulf of Tonkin was totally and completely staged. The ships were not fired upon. It was simply a pretext to claim that they had been attacked, to then officially declare the war in 1964 that had already been underway for 5 years with, quote, U.S. advisors. Of course, that the Tonkin lie resulted in the death of 58,000 Americans and over 1 million Vietnamese, conservatively, on both sides. So to say that it didn't cause death is really improper, but there were no deaths when they staged the Gulf of Tonkin incident on that fateful day. So that's just a little bit of the basics on history. It's important to understand that the 9/11 truth movement is mainstream. We are the mainstream. The scholars, the members of Congress, the former German defense minister, number 3 in Blair's cabinet, members of their parliament are clearly saying that there's something wrong with the official story of 9/11. However you look at 9/11, we know the official story is a fraud from end to end. Hundreds of discrepancies, hundreds of bald-faced lies, things that are so comical it's hard to believe, but then we have to realize that most Americans and people globally just haven't looked at the facts. But more and more in the last almost 5 years have begun to look at it, and that's why in Zogby polls, scientifically conducted in the last few months, we have, 48% of the American people believing the U.S. government was involved in the attacks, and 68% believing there's a cover-up and should be a new investigation. There was a similar Zogby poll, of course, 2 years ago in 2004. So half of the American people, roughly, believe it's an inside job, and the vast majority smell something rotten in the state of Denmark. The evidence, the science, the facts are on our side. And 9/11 is a foundational event for the military-industrial complex. It was clearly involved criminal elements. They are using it to push a police state, the surveillance state, the NSA control grid here in the United States, to federalize our police, to pass the Patriot Act and the reauthorization of the Patriot Act that I challenge you to read, that eviscerates large sections of the Bill of Rights and is totally unconstitutional. And worldwide, countries are using 9/11 and other false flag events that have clearly been staged and other patsy actions and provocateur actions to take freedom worldwide. The United States has gone from the tower on the hill shining light to the world, being the most loved, to now in global polls, respected polling agencies, to being the most hated just in the last 6 years. That's a disgrace. And 9/11 has been the foundation to carry out the policies that have created this sad state of affairs. So we must expose 9/11 because, as the establishment told us, everything changed on 9/11. It's a new world. Give your rights up. Give up liberty for security. When you give up liberty, you don't get security. You get the T word, tyranny, in all caps. We all know that 19 people being directed from a cave in Afghanistan could not have NORAD stand down, could not run CIA drills that day, very similar to what actually happened, could not call public officials and warn them not to fly in the days and weeks leading up to 9/11, could not engage in insider trading leading back to the Central Intelligence Agency and other groups in our own government. We know that the official story is a fraud, and we are here to expose this and to share ideas and to move forward. We absolutely We absolutely must do this for the future of our civilization. The United States of America is America and was loved because we've never been perfect, but we were the best. This is where the freedom came from. This is where people stood up against kings and queens. This is where black people stood up against oppression. This is the place where we've seen so many struggles for liberty and decency and controlling our own lives. And 9/11 is an attempt by global criminal networks to scare us into submission to their 21st century tyranny. And we say no. In closing, and then we'll introduce our panel and let them have opening statements, do Arab nations, do Muslim nations, from Malaysia to Afghanistan, to Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, how do they stand to gain? Qui bono, Latin for who benefits. How do they stand to gain from flying jets into buildings and turning the most powerful country with the most awesome military against them? These people aren't stupid. Who has a motive? Who had written in the PDAC documents, Dick Cheney, that we needed a Pearl Harbor catalyzing event? Brzezinski in the Grand Chessboard in '97 said we need a helpful Pearl Harbor event. This is what they said. This is so we have all this planning, all of this going on. Who gets trillions of dollars of oil? $4+ trillion, and that was at oil price back in 2001. It's almost double that now. $4 trillion in Afghanistan, $4 to $6 trillion in Iraq of discovered reserves there, right under the ground. Hundreds of billions in weapon sales. The war has now cost almost $400 billion. They say we'll be there another decade. That's in the official Pentagon plans. So that'll be well over $1 trillion. If 3.5 years is almost $400 billion, we're talking about almost $1 trillion in weapon sales and Halliburton contracts. This is big money. This is control. But not only that, the PNAC boys told us we'll also use Iraq to build these permanent bases, and that they want civil war there as a pretext to stay and build the bases as a base of operations to then link up, take over Iran and Syria. Then they have Afghanistan. Now they're on China's doorstep. This is about war with China in the final equation. This is about World War III. And there's no reason this needs to happen. We must expose 9/11. It's meant to terrorize the American people and the people of the West into this clash of civilizations that they're engineering. I'd like to introduce our panel now. And I cannot do them justice. Their bios, their letters, their work, their accomplishment, the things they've done, their service is unparalleled. I'm so honored to be with these great men today and with the men and women here in the audience. We have Professor Stephen E. Jones. Is Professor... Stephen Earl Jones is a professor of physics at Brigham Young University who conducts research into nuclear fusion and solar energy. Although the term cold fusion was coined by Jones in 1980, his experimental work was significantly different than more controversial cold fusion experiments by Pons and Fleischmann. Recently, Jones has also investigated, and he investigated that for the federal government, by the way, the hypothesis that the World Trade Center Twin Towers and WTC-7 all collapsed nearly symmetrically on September 11, 2001, were brought down by pre-positioned explosives. In '73, Jones earned his bachelor's degree in physics with honors from Brigham Young University and his PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University in '78. Jones conducted his PhD research at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center from '74 to '77 and postdoctoral research at Cornell University and Los Alamos Physics Facility. And he has written a scholarly paper that has, of course, been posted on the Brigham Young University website. And right now he is working with several other universities and other physicists and scientists, geologists, studying some of the samples they were able to get from the North and South Tower. And it shows conclusively thermite was used to cut the pillars. Not just thermite, the patented type used for demolition, thermate. Conclusive. We'll be discussing that. It's being peer reviewed right now. There's a lot more, but he'll be with us. You'll hear more from him. And then, of course, there's Lieutenant Colonel Bob Bowman. He is the first director of what is known as the Star Wars program, or the Strategic Defense Initiative under Ford and Carter when it was secret. And Lieutenant Colonel Bob Bowman, of course, was the former Director of Advanced Space Programs Development for the U.S. Air Force, and the former United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel with 101 combat missions over Vietnam. And he holds, again, a Ph.D. in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from the California Institute of Technology, and many, many other letters. Webster Griffin Tarpley has been writing for over 25 years on government and state-sponsored and criminal network terrorism. He is an expert in uncovering how governments and how private corporations carry out false terror attacks, murders, other criminal activities, and then blame it on their enemies. He is the iconoclastic Webster Tarpley, an activist, historian, best known for his George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography, which was an underground bestseller and classic. And we are honored to have him here with us today. Against Oligarchy, a collection of Tarpley's essays and speeches, appeared on the internet and has also been a huge success at waking people up. He is the author of 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in the USA. Okay. And then lastly, I'm not going to be able to introduce this guy properly, so later I hope he tells us a little bit more about himself, but he's edited many books, published books on government criminal activity, on the JFK assassination. Professor James Fetzer founded 9/11 Scholars for Truth, a group with over 300 faculty, students, and scholars who question the official scientific account of the September 11, 2001 attacks. The group was founded December 15, 2005, and has sent shockwaves around the world. It's been a magnet, a think tank, to bring the best and brightest minds in many different fields together to expose 9/11 and other government-sponsored terror events. And then, of course, lastly, I also am a documentary filmmaker. I produced 3 films on 9/11, 9/11 The Road to Tyranny, The Masters of Terror, Exposed, and my last film, of course, was Martial Law, 9/11 Rise of the Police State, and a soon-to-be-released film, Terror Storm, which focuses on all of the declassified admissions of state-sponsored terror by Western governments and, of course, the United States government, criminal elements of it. So, gentlemen, we're now going to have a 5-minute, 6-minute opening statement from each of you. Then we'll open it up to a general panel discussion and then questions from the audience. And we also have some other distinguished people who will be speaking at the microphone a little bit later. Professor Jones, if you can please just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you woke up to 9/11, and then go through the incredible new discoveries and developments that you have been working on. Thank you.
Great. We stay here, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks, Al. Well, over the past several years, I received several nudges to investigate what really happened on 9/11. And I must admit, it took me a while to warm up to the idea, but finally I did. And the first time I saw Building 7 come down straight and fast, I realized this is very curious. I hadn't seen it until just about, it's been about 1.5 years now ago, and as soon as I saw it, in a sense, I was hooked. I figured, as a scientist, I can't just ignore this data. I could see that building come straight down. I'd seen demolitions before, controlled demolitions. They look just like that. A kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed. Yeah, it's got these steel columns in the center and around the perimeter, and yet it just falls straight down. So fortunately, I got onto a good website, friend Jim Hoffman's site, their WTC7.net. And the nice thing that, and I have many friends now, in this area. One nice thing that they did on that site is to provide references. And I like that, because then I can check, I check for myself. So I go to this reference. It talks about sulfidation of steel. Gosh, that's curious. How did this sulfur get in this steel? It's high temperature corrosion of the steel with sulfur. Man, that's really strange. I read that. I went to the source. I read it. And pretty quick, I'm learning about molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet, you know, and yet it comes down, and then it's got this molten metal underneath. And where'd that come from? I mean, you know, I hear people say, well, that would be from the metal of the planes. Well, that might work for the towers, possibly, but it sure doesn't work for Building 7. You know, it was 300 plus feet away from the North Tower, and no plane hit it. So where does this molten metal come from? So pretty quick then, as I studied this, I wrote up a paper, which many of you have seen. If you haven't, I hope you would. Just Google on Steve Jones, World Trade Center. It'll pull it right up. And I studied various aspects. And the molten metal is my first topic. It's the one that really caught my interest, and the data is just coming together. Now, I have a sample of this molten metal. Previously, it's molten metal here. Just a tiny sample. This is really all we need. I brought along with me at the last minute. I thought, well, I'll throw that in. And by analyzing this, we determined it is not molten aluminum from the plane. Okay. Indeed, it contains a great deal of iron, which is the product of the thermite reaction. Now, thermite can be purchased on eBay, and many people, I show it in my class, physics, and I'll be showing it this fall in my physical science class. It's commonly shown. It's a very brilliant reaction. You get this white flare, this white dust, which is aluminum oxide coming off, and then this yellow hot molten metal, just white yellow hot, you know, flowing out of this reaction. Now this thermite is so hot, this molten iron, especially when you mix sulfur in. Now it's called thermate. So sulfur added to this molten iron, it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. And we also see this molten, yellow hot molten metal with white wispy ash pouring out of the South Tower just minutes before its collapse. And I've shown this video, and it's just amazing. The photographs of that, it's in the NIST report. They say, well, probably molten aluminum from the aircraft. No, sorry, it's not. We did experiments at BYU with molten aluminum. We heated the steel pan up to yellow hot temperature, pour that aluminum out. It looks like silvery aluminum, even though the pan is yellow hot. And there's reasons for that. Aluminum just doesn't emit much of this incandescent glow. It's very low emissivity. Sorry for the technical details, but the point is the experiments show it still looks silvery, and yet out of the World Trade Center it's yellow hot. Okay, so as we looked at this, and the evidence is just piling up, this is it has the characteristics not of molten aluminum and not of molten, you know, it's not just structural steel that somehow melted. No, it's very little chromium. But it does have sulfur and manganese and some other elements that are characteristic, you see. It's like a fingerprint that the criminal left behind. This carries with it evidence. How was this done? What was used? And I should explain real quickly. This particular, people ask me all the time, where'd you get this? Well, there's a woman in Northeast who was involved, went to one of these memorials that was being put together, you know, the 9/11 memorial, structural steel from the World Trade Center. She noticed on it dirt clinging to the structure. This is several years ago, before I joined the game here, so to speak. And she said, well, that dirt is going to be subject to rain. It's just going to be a mess. And so she just cleaned it up. She just cleaned some of that dirt off. You know, it's in the Northeast, and this memorial's going up. She cleaned it up, put it in a bucket. She saved it. Then as soon as my paper appeared, she read my paper. This last November would have been. As she read my paper, I'm calling for an investigation, particularly of this molten metal, and see what's going on. It'll tell us what happened, give us insight into what really happened on 9/11. Well, she immediately sent me this sample, quite a large sample actually, but not all of it. She said, I'm keeping some back, and I said, that's good, because we may want to, you know, have another lab check it. Don't send it here, you know, you'll send it to another lab directly at some point, probably. Anyway, in there, I don't think she even noticed, there's this molten metal chunks. See? in with this, just from this memorial to 9/11 and to the families, who I deeply sympathize with those families. So we checked this metal, and that's how we got it. And another sample like it, same characteristics: high in iron, manganese, fluorine. I mean, you know, where do these chemicals come from? And then as I studied about thermite, arson, I'll wrap it up here.
No, I was checking to see if my mic was live, Professor. It's key to state you got it from another site separately.
Yes, we have two separate sites. This other one, okay, so, but similar process, you know, acquiring this, just private people, you know, and so anyway, the point is, as we analyze this, I get into this question of thermite arson. It turns out that arsonists, these are the bad guys, right, start fires using thermite. I mean, you can buy this stuff on eBay. It's not like it's a secret or something. And I don't recommend you play with this stuff, by the way. It's very dangerous. Okay, molten yellow hot iron pours out of this. It's highly dangerous, but it will cut through iron. So arsonists use it, and now there's a whole field then of investigation. Investigators know how to look at this metal, and we will be working with others too, and making sure of our results. And so, but these things are coming together, this chain of evidence. This is not the only thing. This is just one of the things. The collapse of Building 7 is another. Studied that. A great paper by Professor Cutler is in the Journal of 9/11studies.com. You can look that up. His paper on the collapse of Building 7. And so anyway, this chain of events leads me to reluctantly conclude that indeed there does seem to be insider, in other words, not just the hijacked planes, but also others involved setting these thermite cutter charges in the World Trade Center to bring them down. This again leads to the conclusion that our Constitution, which is our heritage as Americans, I love my country, I love the Constitution and the people in America. I'm afraid that our Constitution is literally hanging by a thread at this stage. And
Professor, can you specifically, because you've talked about this on my radio show, you've published it, you looked at the thermite, you tested, it's not just thermite, it's the patented thermate.
with the sulfur.
With the sulfur on top of it as an accelerant. Then we expand on that. This is even patented. This is actually used to cut large pillars.
It's true that when you add sulfur to the thermite, it now cuts very quickly through steel. And again, do you remember earlier I spoke of this paper I read? These metallurgists in Massachusetts had looked at World Trade Center 7 steel and some from the towers also. Strange, they said, that high temperature sulfidation. Where does the sulfur come? Where do these high temperatures come from? Well, the answer, you see, we're getting at, it's totally consistent with this thermate.
So specifically, you looked at the science, and only thermite could create these molten pools that a month later were still at many, thousands of degrees hotter than jet fuel burns down in the basement collapse area. And then you have the hypothesis thermite could do that. It's a prime suspect. You get samples. It's not just thermite. It's the demolition special design thermate.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's accurate. I mean, and it's consistent with these other metallurgists. See, that was in the New York Times as the sulfidation of the steel came out. World Trade Center 7, there's no airplane that hit it. And so how do you explain this? And then the towers too. And the New York Times said this is the greatest mystery uncovered so far. Words to that effect.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones. We'll talk more about that. All right. And if we could, we're running late, so let's try to keep the applause down a little bit. I know it's great, I love it, but I want to get as much information in as possible. Thank you, folks. Dr. Bob Bowman, will you please tell us, sir, why you question the official story and what you believe is most important that people understand about why you're questioning it, sir?
Well, if the government has nothing to hide, why is it hiding everything? Why is it confiscated and hidden or destroyed all the evidence? Why is it hiding the videotape of whatever hit the Pentagon? Why is it hiding the audio tapes of the FAA controllers and NORAD? Why is it shipping off to China immediately all the forensic evidence except a little bit, thank God, that Professor Jones was able to get a hold of? The truth about 9/11 is that we don't know the truth about 9/11, and we should. I deserve the truth. You deserve the truth. The families of those killed on 9/11 deserve the truth. The American people deserve the truth, and they're not getting it. One tiny example, why were those planes not intercepted? I'm an old interceptor pilot. I know the drill. I've done it. I know how long it takes. I know the rules. And critics of the government story on 9/11 have said, well, they knew about this and they did nothing. That's not true. If our government had done nothing that day and let normal procedures be followed, those planes, whatever they were, would have been intercepted, the Twin Towers would still be standing, and thousands of dead Americans would still be alive. Now, some in defense of the government say, well, I guess there was a little bit of incompetence on that day. If this massive failure was incompetence, why was there nobody fired, nobody court-martialed, nobody demoted, nobody punished? The truth of the matter is that those primarily responsible in a position where they could have made the difference were either promoted or given the Medal of Freedom, for God's sakes. Alex talked about the connection between 9/11 and Iraq. That's my forte, because as a career military officer, as a combat veteran, I am really incensed that our government is ordering our sons and daughters around the world to kill Arabs for the oil companies. And 9/11 was their excuse. 9/11 was their new Pearl Harbor. People tell me, oh, we had to do something, 9/11, and I say, yeah, but why Iraq? Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden were bitter enemies. If we really thought those 19 hijackers were responsible, why didn't we attack Saudi Arabia? The truth about the Iraq war is that it has nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction or democracy or freedom or getting rid of Saddam Hussein or protecting America or our allies. It has to do with money, it has to do with oil, and it has to do with raw imperial power. I'm the next congressman from Florida's 15th district. And when I get there, I am taking the 9/11 truth movement mainstream. It's time the 9/11 truth movement moved out of rented hotels and into the halls of Congress. I may not be there yet, but I have already lined up co-sponsors for legislation to initiate a truly independent investigation of 9/11. And also articles of impeachment for Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice.
Thank you. Thank you.
As a pilot who flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam, I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that includes a renegade president. It's time the whole oil mafia were removed from office and indicted for treason. God bless America, and God grant us regime change in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all the applause, folks. We want to keep it short, though. More information. Yes, I omitted that he is also running for Congress as a Democrat in Florida in the 15th District. Bob Bowman, doctor, thank you. Webster, Griffin, Tarpley, 9/11. Mole networks. A lot of people say, well, if the government or elements of it were involved, it'd be so big it'd come out. People speak out, we'd find out. Is it the answer we have?
If you go and look at something like the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb, there were tens of thousands of people involved, and the secret never came out. So I think this is generally a red herring. Let me just say how I got into this. I was in Berlin on September 11th, so it all hit me late in the afternoon after coming out of a conference that I was attending. When you see something like this, you're confronted by an act of spectacular war provocation, obviously involving hundreds and hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars. And you can figure out, for me it was about 30 seconds in Berlin to figure it out, who could do that? Who has the physical, technical capability? If you know the contents of the world in terms of secret intelligence agencies, you know it's the US, the British, the French, the Russians, the Mossad. And of course, other countries in their own soil. But given where it was and when it was, given the suppression of air defense for 1 hour and 45 minutes and even more, it can only be a force inside the US command, with some help, as we turn out later to find, from the British, from MI5, MI6. Now, the goal of this is obviously to bring about the war of civilizations, the Samuel Huntington thesis, the Wolfowitz doctrine about never letting any other power in the world get even regional predominance, and then the PNAC documents which publicize this entire thing. So you're dealing with a coup d'etat. 9/11 is a coup d'etat, one part of the government attacking another part of the government. I would say, if you want to identify who did it, we can talk about a rogue network, an invisible government, a secret team, the deep state, the fifth column, many words that have been coined to describe what everybody is vaguely aware of, that if you go back to the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Kennedy assassination, the Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnam War, and in particular, the Iran-Contra drug running and gun running, this is necessarily the network that has the physical and technical capabilities to carry this out. Now, I came to this from having studied NATO spheres of influence terrorism in Central Europe, the Moro assassination, the Red Brigades in Italy, the Baader-Meinhof group in Germany. and also the Iran-Contra questions. And when you look at it from this point of view, there's a prima facie conclusive case that the only agency that's capable of doing this is one cutting across the Department of Defense, the CIA, the NSA, the National Security Council, and so forth. Now, that hypothesis has to be then tested by a rigorous research, which I tried to do for my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA, and I think the finding is now conclusive. If you look at the absurdities of this story, we're given 19 patsies, a lot of them basket cases, a lot of them very low-grade subjects, a lot of people who would have difficulty even getting through a normal day without some kind of support, right? Some of them couldn't get a driver's license probably in any state except possibly New Jersey. So they're very low-grade subjects, and we're told that these 19 patsies were able to carry out these spectacular feats. The fact that they lived on military bases and were trained on military bases and were, I believe, reporting to terrorist controllers and case officers inside something like the Able Danger organization. You've also got the fact then of 1 hour and 45 minutes with no air defense. You've got the fact that the buildings had to come down through controlled demolition. It's a physical anomaly, as Professor Jones has said. It's clear also that there's no Boeing aircraft at the Pentagon, but rather something much more like a cruise missile. And finally, in Shanksville, the airplane has obviously been destroyed in midair, probably shot down, probably blown up in this way. There's also another level. This myth is absurd. It is intellectually and morally degrading to believe it. It is a myth of fascist Hitlerian proportions. The Nazis, we don't want to eat our own clock with applause. I appeal to people to save it for the end, because otherwise we're not going to get the television time that we've been fighting for. The Nazis talked about the myth of the 20th century as nationalism and chauvinism. Terrorism is now the myth of the 21st century. We're told that the purpose of the United States for the entire foreseeable future is the war on terror and nothing but. That's no future for the United States or for the world. It is a racist and warmongering myth. And if you believe it, you will share in the degradation of the ruling elite of this country, who have, I think, they're headed for a tremendous crash and dead end. The most important thing is that the 9/11 myth is, of course, the premise and the root of the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war and the coming attack on Iran. I left Washington a couple of days ago. Washington is gripped by a war psychosis. Preparations are virtually complete for the nuclear attack on Iran based on absolutely nothing. We've got prestigious figures from the Clinton administration, Secretary Perry, calling for a preemptive attack on North Korea. And perhaps the scariest of all, the Lieber and Press article in Foreign Affairs in the March-April issue, talking about a first strike against the thermonuclear forces of Russia and or China. 3 paths leading to World War III, the incineration of this planet, all of them presided over by a group I can only call the neocon fascist madmen, the Strangeloves, the people who have got to be driven out of public life. Now, the basis of their power is the 9/11 myth. We are now in a race against time. Cheney and Bush have run up against a brick wall in the United Nations. They need an outside event. The Cheney Doctrine calls for the nuclear attack on Iran in the wake of a new fake 9/11 or new fake Gulf of Tonkin. That is now what is being prepared. They want something to unblock this situation, perhaps something in Europe under the aegis of the World Cup soccer games, to stampede Europe into this war against Iran on the side of the U.S. So therefore, the task of our movement, as I see it, is to educate the U.S. and world populations to the following point. If weapons of mass destruction go off anywhere in the world, please don't think Bin Laden, the cave, Afghanistan, Pashtunistan, or some other myth-drenched region. Please don't think it's Iran or Hezbollah. They're not that stupid. You've got to look to Cheney's office, Cheney's backers, Cheney's controllers, the neocon war party, and above all, the invisible government, the people with the technical ability to bring these things about. So I think this is our task, to educate the people to the point where the weapon of terrorism, which the oligarchy, the invisible government, proposed to use to organize this society, we must take that weapon and break it before their faces, deprive them of the ability to stampede and manipulate hundreds of millions of people using these cynically planned terrorist events of the synthetic terrorist type. And I think that's what our movement has to do. Thank you.
Professor Tarpley, thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Jim Fetzer?
We've not only been able to falsify, refute the alleged physics of the situation, but essentially everything the government has told us about 9/11 is false. Let me offer an illustration. I've always been very suspicious of this scenario in which a ragtag group of terrorists with box cutters could overtake 4 commercial airliners. In my opinion, any group of American passengers confronted with a couple of terrorists with box cutters would have beaten them to death with their luggage. So let me offer you my top 10 reasons for thinking they are fake. And where's Paul Schaefer when you need him? Number 10 top reason for thinking the hijackers are fake. Their names do not appear on any passenger manifest. That's not easy to arrange, my friends. If you know of any other case, I'd be interested in hearing it. Number 9, none of them were subject to any autopsy. Would have been interesting, powerful evidence if, in fact, we had some bodies here to offer some proof, but there is none. Number 8, top 10 reason for thinking these hijackers are fake. 5 to 7 at least have turned up alive and well and living in the Middle East. They've even been interviewed by the BBC and The Guardian in the UK. Now, I dare say that if they were actually killed in the impact of these airliners, then it's even more difficult to imagine how they could have arranged those interviews. Reason number 7. The FBI, nevertheless, has not revised its list. This is quite surprising. They have to be aware. David Ray Griffin's second book on 9/11, the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, makes this point as his number 1 item. They have to know, yet they have not revised their list. As an aside, I expect we're going to see some backtracking and equivocating now, and they're going to be saying, well, maybe they aren't really sure about all the names on their list. But listen to this. Reason number 6. A special agent of the FBI by the name of Flagg, F-L-A-G-G, has explained that the FBI knew almost immediately the names of all 19 hijackers because they discovered a piece of luggage left by Mohammed Atta when he had driven up to Portland, Oregon, and then turned around and rushed down to Logan just in time to participate in the hijacking of a plane from that airport. According to Flagg, this piece of luggage Atta left behind included not only a terrorist manual, but a very convenient list of the 19 hijackers. And I say, well, that's really quite stunning, considering 5, 6, or 7 of these guys have turned up alive and well. How can you explain that? Reason number 5, and that, incidentally, gives new meaning to the word false flag. My top 10, number 5 reason for thinking these hijackers were fake. They could not have flown the planes. Neelis Agadavan, among others, who's a pilot and aeronautical engineer, has studied their training background, and it's simply preposterous to presume these guys who could barely get a Cessna off the ground could have piloted a commercial airliner and brought it to its target. It's preposterous. Top 10 reason number 4. Those cell phone calls that we've heard so much about could not have been made at the altitudes and speeds these planes were flying. A.K. Dudney, a professor of computer science from Western Ontario, has taken cell phones of different makes and models on different flights around the country and discovered at altitudes above 2,000 feet and speeds above 230 miles an hour that cell phone connections become fewer and farther between. They would have been impossible. And that, of course, would include the one you've all heard about from alleged passenger Mark Bingham, where he calls his mother and says, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham."
You believe me, don't you?
Top 10 reason number 3. During the trial of the alleged 20th hijacker, Zacarias Moussaoui, a tape recording was played, allegedly from Flight 93, which included the passengers discussing how they were going to attempt to break down the cabin door using a drink cart. One astute student of the case wrote me to point out that this was ostensibly a cockpit voice recording, and that cockpit voice recorders do not record voices in the passenger compartment. Top 10 reason number 2 why these hijackers appear to be fake. The last words attributed on that tape to the hijackers who were facing imminent death was Allah Akbar, which is Arabic for God is great, God is great. According to a Muslim member of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, the last words that a devout follower of Islam should say when confronting imminent death is not those words, but rather, in Arabic, there is but one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. I therefore suggest that the writers assigned to this script simply didn't know enough to get it right. Number 1, top 10 reason number 1 for believing these hijackers were fake. Zacarias Moussaoui, this April, was subjected to a trial to determine whether he should be punished by life imprisonment or even death for not coming forward to reveal the plot, which the government maintained, had he done, would have enabled the government to have intervened and saved lives. I make 3 observations. A year before, April last, Zacarias Moussaoui confessed to a different plot. He had acknowledged that he had been involved in a plot to fly a plane into the White House in order to extort release of a terrorist, a sheik who had been imprisoned for terrorist activities in 1993. He denied he had anything to do with 9/11. That is the crime to which he confessed. A year later, the federal government has played a shell game, and now they're insinuating and implying he had something to do with 9/11. As my good friend Webster Tarpley has observed, this man had no obligation to come forward and to confess his involvement in a plot. Even if he had been involved in 9/11, we still have something here known as the Fifth Amendment. He had no obligation to incriminate himself. Third, and most tellingly, and this must have been incredibly embarrassing to the government, an FBI agent testified he'd been following Moussaoui. He'd been observing him taking this flight training. He had suspected that he might be involved in a terrorist plot, even to fly planes into the trade towers, though he suggested later that was merely a lucky guess. He testified under oath that he had told his supporters, his superiors, about his suspicions, not once, not twice, 70 times. And I say to you, 5 or 6 might be excused as ordinary incompetence. 20 or 25 may be criminal neglect. 70 times has to have been a matter of direct policy, deliberate policy. They were keeping these guys in reserve so they could use them as their cover story when the government itself perpetrated these dastardly terrorist acts.
All right. I'd like now, in just a moment, to have an open discussion for about 15 minutes between the members of the panel, and then we'll have about 10, 15 minutes to take some questions from the audience, and a few other distinguished members who've been part of this 9/11 meeting that we've had will also be able to say a few words. I just want to state on the record that if you look at one of the smoking guns of 9/11 is the supposed hijackers working for the U.S. government, being involved, living at bases. We have the Pensacola News Journal, MSNBC, reporting that at least 3 of them were training in a secret program at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. That's admitted, hidden in plain view. Then the dean of the Defense Language School, the head of the school, it was in the major Californian papers and even in the Associated Press. It was first published in the San Jose Mercury News. He went public with the headline that the government was behind the attacks. And I even called and talked to him, but he wouldn't go on the radio show. They were talking about court-martialing him, but they dropped that. Why did he say this? Well, buried in the article it was that 3 of the hijackers were trained in high-level spy training at the Defense Language School here in California. Then we have FBI informants living with some of the hijackers, living next door to them, giving them money. And then when other FBI agents in Miami, in Chicago, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Phoenix, picked up all this chatter that they had these patsies out creating this history so they could then use them later, they were told, back off, shut up, you're off the case. That's on record too. There's hundreds of these points that are all on record. And remember, the government tells us, elements of the government tell us, that the terrorists attacked us because they hate our freedom. Well, then why is the government taking all of our freedom? To make the terrorists happy? But these globalists, they love to have little word games, little tricks, little things hidden in plain view. You see, it's true. The terrorists really did attack us to take our freedom and to seize the United States as an engine of global government. One of the main reasons we're having this event, I should have said it earlier, so I'll say it now, is to stop a new 9/11. Every time there's a new terrorist attack, every time there's some new event, the approval ratings for this police state go up, and then they drop down again. And on every front, the neocons and their handlers and the other networks that are out there that work with them are in trouble. The jig is up, the people are waking up, and it's very, very exciting. Let's go ahead and start with Dr. Bob Bowman. Bob, why don't you just start this off, and let's all just go back and forth here and have a discussion about strategies, where we go from here, how we expose this.
We are exposing it. The old story, you know, the problem with this country is ignorance and apathy. And one guy turns to the other and says, "Do you believe that?" And the other guy says, "I don't know and I don't care." You know. How do we end the ignorance and apathy? Well, I'll tell a story tonight in my speech about a couple of people I met on the flight out here and how I turned them around. And the answer to how we get rid of this ignorance and apathy is one person at a time. But we have to speak up. We have to raise our voices. We have to speak truth to power. We can't just sit back and let somebody else do it. We can't just sit back and say, well, Alex is doing it on his radio show, I don't have to do anything. Because a lot of the times it's us who are listening to Alex. We need to go out to those people who haven't heard him, and we need to tell them the truth. We need to convince them that they don't really know the truth and that they should. We need to stir the pot. We need to create a dissonance in their belief system so that finally it will waken them up. And we can do it, and we will do it, and we, for goodness sakes, are for sure going to do it when I get up there in Congress and really raise some hell. Thank you.
I have a question I'd like to address to Webster Tarpley. Being here at the hotel, I've talked to wait staff, people in the bar. I've talked to people that work at the hotel. I'd say about 30% of those, just here at this hotel that we randomly picked in LA, I'm from Austin, Texas, are already aware of my work, your work, of what's happening. And then others that I've talked to don't attack me. They go, yeah, I've always had a suspicion. And that's a microcosm of the polls, the Zogby polls, the CNN polls of 90% believing there's a cover-up, 83% another CNN poll. Everywhere I go, the talk radio interviews I do on even shows that are adversarial, that are coming after me, the host is attacking me, but almost every caller calls in agreeing that at least there's a cover-up, something's wrong, they've seen all these lies. And I would say the majority of those believe it's an inside job. Do you think that, you'll speak to that? And then also, I'd like to get your take on how this is affecting the establishment. You know, you studied these rogue networks, the shadow government. I've seen a lot of their confidence in the last year or so evaporate. They're not as arrogant now. Can you speak to that?
Alex, I think the dams are breaking. As Charlie Sheen said, the worm is turning. The myth is collapsing. The shock effect is wearing off. Human reason is reasserting itself. We see a lot of fake terrorist events now orchestrated with very little basis. We see London, 250 people in a SWAT team shoot a guy. He can't find the cyanide and the sarin gas they came to get. Toronto, 17 patsies arrested. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had delivered fertilizer to their house and said that was a bomb.
Same thing in Florida.
If Sergeant Preston of the Yukon with Yukon King the Wonder Dog comes and delivers 10 tons of fertilizer to your house and says, you want a lifetime supply, don't sign for it. You'll be taken into custody. And then we've just had, I think, a really pathetic group of patsies rounded up in Florida, the Haiti group. I think all of that is that the myth is collapsing. Now, what do we need? This movement of ours, I think, is in the process of going from maybe 5,000 full-time activists towards, I hope, something more like about 5 million. In the process, the main barrier are the left gatekeepers. Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman, Air America, most of them. The Nation magazine, the left liberal intelligentsia, the biggest barrier. They have obsessively parroted the racist, warmongering official version. They've slandered people like us who try to fight against it. These people have got to be discredited. They've got to be gone around. Now, I think we've...
Well, Webster, in all fairness, I have seen them softening. I have seen them more coming over to the reality.
They better soften really fast.
Professor Jones had a comment.
If I just can, we need the impeachment of Bush Cheney, but the first item has got to be misprision of treason. In other words, 9/11 crimes have to be the first item. The other impeachment doesn't go anywhere.
All right.
The other question then is, if the ruling elite try to impose martial law and a wider war, calling off elections, let's do what the people did in Madrid, back in Spain, back in the spring of 2004.
3/11.
About a third to a half of the Spanish population went into the streets for an open-ended general strike. If they take your liberties and the Constitution
Thank you, Webster
away,
Tarpley. I
general
agree.
strike to get them back.
We've got to be ready if there's another false flag to look at the evidence immediately, and if it shows that it's these crime networks doing it, exposing them. Professor Stephen Jones?
Yeah, I want to tell a little story, true story. So I called my car mechanic up, you know, about my car, work on my car, and he says, I said, "No, how are things?" And he said, he said about this 9/11, you know, it's cut out of the blue, and he said, you know, the Pentagon released these tapes that supposedly show that, my car mechanic, so supposedly show airline 77, American 77, going into the Pentagon. So he said, so I looked at these tapes because, you know, he'd read. He said, I heard about what you're talking about. So I perked up my ears and I looked at those tapes and he said, I couldn't see any planes. I don't know what they're doing to us, but now he said, so I said, yeah, well, how about my car? He says, but wait a minute, did you know that the FBI, right after this Pentagon crash, they went over and seized, I mean, within minutes, they seized from a gas station there, they seized the surveillance tape, and they went to a hotel and they seized the surveillance tapes. I said, yeah, I knew about that. It's kind of curious. He said, curious? It's bizarre. I mean, well, I want those tapes, you know. And I just had to say, well, I agree with you. I'd sure like to get this information, and not just those tapes, but all these photographs and videos that NIST has obtained. We'd like to get a hold of those. You know, there's a petition that we have on our Scholars for 9/11 Truth site requesting, is probably not the right term, demanding release of information. I mean, why are we being, you talk about a cover-up and people becoming aware that there has been a cover-up. I mean, I see this all around, people telling me, you know, I just want to find out what happened. Well, that's what we're about, and spreading the word, getting people aware, and I keep coming back to the Constitution because it does have remedies. It was designed with checks and balances to prevent one branch, like the executive or the judicial, from getting too much power. It was designed to contain just that problem. And I think it's high time that we get back to the Constitution and exercise constitutional remedies.
Thank you, Professor. I want to get a comment from Professor Fetzer, but I would just add, I forgot. I get here, I see two LAPD cops. They both know who I am. They tell me they're fans. There's some off-duty police here. I talk to them. There's some even bodyguards here. I talk to them. Oh, yeah, we all know. Oh, yeah, we all know it's an inside job. Sure, we're not stupid, especially investigators. A lot of these are like, veteran detectives and people that I'm here talking to. They know. I mean, if you have basic, rudimentary skills in investigation, you know the official story is a fraud. Jim Fetzer?
The mass media in the United States is controlled by 5 corporations with respect to about 90% of what we hear and read. Our last bastions of freedom of speech and inquiry are the internet, talk radio, and thank God for what remains of public television, C-SPAN, and radio. The nation's leading newspaper has disgraced itself by its utter failure to come to grips with the obvious and overwhelming evidence that what happened in its own city, a few blocks from its own headquarters, killing 3,000 of its own citizens, was a crime committed by the United States government. And if these people are too stupid or too ignorant to put together 2 + 2, and understand what that means, let them at least confront the fact that an egregious crime was committed by the Environmental Protection Agency as that vast cloud of toxic dust welled through the streets of Manhattan, bringing death and destruction to thousands on a delayed basis. I've had first responders call me. They could barely get a breath out, telling how their lungs were coated with this stuff, microparticles of concrete, residue of thermate, heavy metals from computers that were absolutely decimated, the asbestos with which that building was laden. They are dying. Christy Whitman of the EPA assured them then that it was safe to breathe that dust. If the New York Times can confront no other aspect of this issue, by God, let them confront that one.
I want to just go down the line briefly because I've interviewed many of you on talk radio, many of you personally for documentaries. But we've talked, Professor Jones, and it's in my new film that we're just about to release, Terror Storm. I mean, you've come right out that clearly from the evidence, the research you've done, it proves the official story is a fraud. Can you, for people here, restate your inside job statement? And then I would like to get the take of the other panelists here on their view. I mean, if they're ready to come out and state that this is clearly an inside job. Professor Jones?
Sure. So the evidence that I started with, Alex, on that, the molten metal pools indicate, in this case, a large amount of incendiary or explosive material. Super thermite is explosive. Ordinary thermite and thermate are incendiaries. So there's an enormous quantity then, and you see the effects too of the explosives. You see these plumes of debris coming out, and I hope people will look online, for instance, at WTC7.net, Scholars for 9/11 Truth. You can get your hands on these data quite easily now because of the internet, still freely available, I'm pleased to say. The point is, planting these explosives and incendiaries requires a group of people. It requires pre-planning. That this implies an inside job. It doesn't have to be a large group of people, and indeed, I suspect it was a small group of people, perhaps about 19, who were actually in the know. You see what I'm saying? And then there were others below them who were basically, you put this material, we put it in the elevator shafts and so on. They give them instructions.
In fact, you've done a calculation on how many men it would take, how many trips to load the buildings with the explosives?
Yeah, let's see. So in my paper, see, I interviewed a demolition expert on this. How much explosives does it take to bring down a tower like this? And he said, well, he's done hundreds. Southwark towers took 200 or 300 pounds of explosives. Well, that means if you scale that to the towers, you're talking about 1,000 pounds, roughly. In the towers case, it does look like they put more for redundancy, for example. For instance, you don't know where the plane's going to go in, but you want to start the explosions where the plane went in, so you have to have extra explosives at different levels. Are you following me here? Different levels. So then with a radio control, you say, and computerized, after about an hour, we're ready now. Computer controls will start near where the planes went in, and we'll just knock the material out of the way, so this will be a complete straight down collapse. In fact, I asked him, well, that covers the number. There's a number of things I asked him. You know, what happens, I asked him, if you do some explosions, you set your explosives, and some of them go off, but something happens, and it doesn't keep the sequence of explosions. What happens? He says,
many times in official controlled demolitions,
right.
It fails. It doesn't bring the building down. It's that, so they will normally do an even higher load
right.
to ensure that happens. Also, the Tower 1 and 2 were top-down demolitions from all
right.
the evidence and what scientists and demolition experts and Kevin Ryan of Underwriting Laboratories went public, and they did internal studies. It just was impossible with the official story.
Yeah.
But 7 was the classic controlled demolition with the central column being blown. We have the squib blast points on video, and the building falls in perfectly on its footprint. And I've talked to people that work as engineers at the highest levels of different controlled demolition companies, and they say that was one of the most beautiful jobs. Most controlled demolition companies, it's sad, but it's true, most controlled demolition companies that do this cannot do it that good. This was what I've been told is it was a work of art in the industry.
That's right, yeah. Collapsing straight down onto its footprint. You know, folks who haven't seen the collapse of Building 7, you really need to look at it, how it comes straight down. I have my students time it. You know, I have shown that. It's an example of free fall, as we talk about Newton's laws.
Newtonian physics there.
You betcha. and you know, we time it, click, and it comes down. You look at the corner, so things happen, but you start where the corner, when it starts to move and begins its steady descent, 6.5 seconds, plus or minus 0.2. And then you look at free fall. If you dropped an apple, Newton's apple, you see, off the corner, it would take 6.0 seconds. So it's just a little, and then we look at other controlled demolitions. We know they're controlled demolitions. Same thing. It's just slightly behind free fall. Now, how can it fall so fast?
Well, we also know with real-world laboratory events that we can use as experiments, no modern steel buildings ever collapse from fire. We've had the Madrid fire almost 2 days, 100-foot white-hot flames shooting out, and the building was gutted, but even aluminum desks were sitting there and hadn't melted, and none of the major steel beams even got weakened. This happens over and over and over again, but magically on 9/11, 3 separate buildings. Then FEMA has given 5 different reasons Building 7 fell, and they have to always go back and say, okay, that wasn't true. Oh, a fuel oil tank blew up. They say, well, no, that's not it. Oh, the North Tower fell on it. Well, that didn't happen with small fires. Didn't. Some of the dust and debris hit it. A few windows got broken. So lie, 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 lie. They don't have a reason why. You know, these talking heads get up on television, on Fox and CNN, and I've seen them going, well, we have FEMA saying a tank did it, and we have FEMA saying it fell because the North Tower fell on it. No, a building actually had a tower fall on it, and that was Bankers Trust, and it burned, but nothing collapsed because that's never happened. It doesn't happen. It's science. Would you like to speak to that, Dr. Bowman?
Well, a lot of people have called me a conspiracy nut, including in my campaign, and so far they've been anonymous, but when my opponent joins them and says, you're a conspiracy nut because of your views on 9/11, I'm going to say, great, debate me on the issue. I am not into conspiracy theories, and I absolutely reject the most unbelievable conspiracy theory yet, which is the official one told us by our government.
I would also add to that if you look at the career of Abraham Lincoln, he got vilified as Spotty Lincoln because of his spot resolutions. He challenged the Polk administration to say, you say that the Mexicans attacked first to start the Mexican War. I want to know the spot. I want to know where. He didn't accept it. The favorite smoking gun that I would point to is the angel is next question. In other words, a death threat to Bush that comes in to Air Force One, Angel, accompanied by a cascade of top-level, top-secret code words from across the agencies, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, and so forth, indicating, well, that this is the moment when the rogue network speaks. And they are presenting an ultimatum to Bush, which is, in effect, with all these code words, we have the ability to launch nuclear missiles if we want to. We have those launch codes. You, Bush, will either start the war of civilizations in conventional form by talking about bin Laden, al-Qaeda, and Afghanistan, and invading Afghanistan, or we can launch it in nuclear form anytime we want. We can blow up Baghdad or Damascus or Tehran or any of these places.
Webster, I think you need to give a little bit of backstory on Angel.
Well, Angel is the code word for Air Force One, and this is a threat. It was very prominent in the first days. It's generally forgotten. Most books don't talk about it. And again, I regard it as crucial because this is the moment when the invisible government speaks. It's the principal political evidence of the day. Who did it? And this is all happening in a goldfish bowl. The Mossad, the French services, as well as the Russians, all saw this. They were all aware of what had happened, and it was a great brouhaha about this in the first couple of days. The other idea is that you're in the middle of 15-plus drills, the greatest density of military and terror drills in the history of the United States on that day. There are 4 or 5 drills that are designed to suppress air defense. They take fighter planes away from the Washington to New York corridor, send them to northern Canada, Alaska, Iceland, or indeed the Iraq no-fly zone.
And then there's also 4 hijacking drills going on and a Tripod 2 drill going on where they'd already pulled the command center out of Building 7 and out to the end of the pier.
So what they're doing is inserting fake radar blips onto screens, having planes flying around saying, I am hijacked. So we get up to 29 total aircraft reported hijacked on that day. Langley Air Force Base is down to 1/3 of their strength. Now, a loyal officer, whoever he was, would put 2 fighters over Washington if he had 2 and let the attackers come to them. The question there being the decapitation of the National Command Authority. But now let's get to Global Guardian. The thing that people have to see is on the morning of 9/11, before any planes were hijacked, the U.S. was in a full thermonuclear alert posture. B-1s and B-52s flying around loaded with hydrogen bombs, land-based missiles ready to go, submarines in launch position. General Ivashov of the Russian forces that I met and talked to was watching this from Moscow, and he said, first we saw an all-out military mobilization, a Cuban Missile Crisis-style deployment of all thermonuclear weapons, and then we saw the planes getting hijacked. The goal of this, obviously, is that in the middle of the day, there's the Bush-Putin phone call, where Bush delivers an ultimatum to Russia, saying, in effect, guess what, we're taking Afghanistan, we're taking Central Asia, we're taking Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, the 5 Central Asian republics. What if Putin, instead of being the very intelligent figure that he is, had said, the hell you are, we'll blow your head off? You then would have had thermonuclear escalation. This is one of the reasons I put a mushroom cloud on the cover of my book.
Webster, I would just add that that particular general who you've been in public with giving speeches, he's on record saying it's clearly an inside job. And we know, this is a Newsweek magazine, that 2 days before 9/11, Bush had the full launch orders to attack Afghanistan on his desk, and that the troops had already massed in the months before, 44,000 U.S. troops, 18,000 British troops in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, 2 carrier groups, all lined up, bombers lined up, everything ready. But they never heard of a plan to fly planes into a building. Professor Fetzer, and then we're going to have a closing comments from all of you, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Well, it's very difficult to go beyond what's already been covered. Let me offer an illustration of the media complicity here from a not surprising source, namely Fox News. Thursday night, I was invited on to Hannity and Combs, ostensibly to discuss the results of investigations conducted by Scholars for 9/11 Truth. When I got on the show, however, I discovered that instead of wanting to address the rather crucial results, such as we have been discussing here, including that we had established that the Twin Towers were brought down by controlled demolition, which I said, including that we had Norman Mineta's testimony that Dick Cheney had given a stand-down order not to shoot the plane approaching the Pentagon, which we had, including that the FBI in recent weeks had affirmed it has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11, which I said they were more interested in whether I had discussed any of these questions with my students than whether what I was telling them was true.
And they were calling them children. I thought when you're 20-something years old, you're not a child. But
I tell you, this is a perfect illustration. We must work to get the word out. We must reconstitute the Congress. We must reaffirm our existence as a free and democratic republic. The one great fear, the greatest fear we all share, that as the noose tightens, as the truth emerges, as more and more people turn on this administration for the tyrants and liars and thieves that they are, that the threat of impeachment, trial, punishment, and incarceration is going to lead them to effect another fake terrorist attack, suspend the Constitution, and turn the American military on the American people. This, I am sorry to say, my friends, is what America, the crisis we face today. Do not look away.
And those preparations have been made. I mean, even former Supreme Court justices have gone on record saying a dictatorship's being set up. Bob Woodward, a few months ago in San Antonio, gave a speech. It was in the San Antonio Express-News, saying that we're going into a dictatorship. We're in great danger. I mean, serious mainstream people are seeing this. They're openly saying, we want to get rid of posse comitatus. We're going to have to put troops on the streets. We're going to have to search you. But the borders are going to stay wide open. Don't worry. We've got to now have closing comments. But Dr. Bob Bowman, you were going to say one thing quickly before we did that?
Yes, I'm working with people high up in the U.S. military to get them to remember the Nuremberg principles, that we in the military not only have the right but the duty to refuse an illegal order. And if the civilian authority comes down to them to nuke Iran, they should not only refuse that order, but arrest whoever gave it as a war criminal.
I would just add that we've now seen 8 top generals. We've now seen 8 top generals go public and say, quote, this is crazy, this is wrong, this is a fraud. So there are more and more people at high levels in government and out of government that are speaking out. And that's good, because this is a time for courage. And I want to thank all of you who've been here with your incredible courage. And before we line up to take questions after this final statement, we're going to talk to Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis. We're also going to let Barry Zwicker have a quick comment, and also Jimmy Walter, who's here, have been part of the presentations here in the last day. But quickly, gentlemen, because we're running low on time, we've got exactly 20 minutes left here. C-SPAN has expanded a little bit, but a closing comment from each of you, please.
Well, we've heard several nudges to study 9/11, and I hope those who are watching this on C-SPAN will say that perhaps this is your time to get on the internet or get a DVD. That friend of yours who's trying to talk to you about 9/11, get some more information. Find out for yourself. The information is there. Quick story, professor, young, bright physics professor at my university, stopped me in the hall just the other day. He said, I know you've got this sample. What have you found in it? And I said, well, it's mostly iron. He said, it's not aluminum from the plane. Okay, now what else did you find in there? I said, well, there's some aluminum because of the nature of it, but not much. I said, well, we also found in there not much chromium at all. He said, oh, well, then it's not the structural steel, not just the structural steel that's melted. I said, you're right there. What else did you find in there? We found sulfur, and this stumped him, you know. Well, what's the sulfur for? So I explained real quickly, sulfur makes the thermate cut more rapidly through structural steel. And he said, oh, of course, that would just make a eutectic. It's going to cut right through that steel. Very bright, young physicist. And then he said, it's exciting that your research is coming together and its answers are, and then he stopped and he said, but on the other hand, it's very sad for our country. And it is. But we're not done. We still have a constitution. We still have remedies, and we can keep that if we can work together.
And we're fighting for this country.
We are.
Bob Bowman, final statement.
First, a scary thought for you. Can you imagine what would have happened if George W. Bush had been president during the Cuban Missile Crisis? And then finally, I'd really like, because there's much more than we can say today, go to Bowman2006.com, my campaign website, Bowman2006.com, and take a look and read all the stuff there. And I'll tell you, if just you people, I know you've paid a lot of money to come to this conference, and it's worth it. If you write a check for $100 and send it to Bowman for Congress, I'm going to be a shoo-in, and I'll represent you, and I'll get the truth out. Thank you.
Thank you. Webster Tarpley?
I would try to sum up by saying we've got two intersecting processes. On the one side, the dams are breaking, the worm is turning, the myth is collapsing, people are throwing off this reign of terror, this brainwashing that was done around these events. On the other side, everything is now in place for the attack on Iran. It's likely to be a nuclear attack. And they're waiting only for the outside event. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt told us the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The Bush administration says, in effect, be afraid all the time. This has to be rejected. There are, however, 35 to 40% of the population of this country who support Bush based on the fact that they're scared out of their wits. And they're beyond reason on most issues. They believe that the attacks came from bin Laden and the cave. We have to show them the attacks were war provocations, cynically planned inside U.S. government offices from the bowels of the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the Pentagon and the rest of the intelligence
Webster Tarpley,
communities.
thank you so much. Jim Fetzer, we got to go quick.
This man poses as the security president, but he doesn't act like it. He has defunded now New York City and Washington, D.C. to the tune of at least 40% of what they should have to guard against terrorist acts. He's brought in the Dubai Ports Authority to control our ports, which is absurd if what he's been telling us the last 5 years is true. And now he is creating a network of highways from Mexico to Canada, which I've only just discovered, that are going to completely transform the character of the United States of America, and I've yet to hear a word of public discussion or debate about it. National security has three foundations. One is economic security. This man has bankrupted the nation. We're up to $9 trillion in debt and growing. The second is military strength. The war in Iraq is sapping our military. General after general says the National Guard is all but broken. The military cannot sustain it. And the third is our moral standing. He has taken this nation from the most admired and respected to the most reviled and despised. That was our greatest source of security in our past. He has turned Iraq into a huge terrorist state. I say to you, the claim that George Bush is the security president is nothing but a cruel joke.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Just in my closing remarks here before we take some questions and some comments, if you want to learn more about 9/11 and other false flag terror events, visit Infowars.com or PrisonPlanet.com or JonesReport.com. And I again want to thank all the presenters that have been here, the presenters that are coming up later today, and all of you for coming out. Thank you so much. The first questions or statements we're going to get briefly is from Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis. These are two of the gentlemen that made Loose Change 1 and 2. And of course, Loose Change 2 is a 9/11 film that sent shockwaves across the country. Jason, go ahead.
It's on? Yeah. I'm going to make this as brief as possible. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Burmis. I'm lucky enough to be part of the Louder Than Words production team. Basically, before we present evidence from the final cut, I'd just like to go over the movement for a moment. Previously, we've all been told we're crazy, we're nuts, they would never do something like this. Then we began to hear that's interesting, or they knew. Shortly after that, we began to hear, yeah, they did it, but I'm only one person. I ask all of you, do we look like one person? Now the mainstream media is being forced to cover this movement due in large part to our tenacity and ingenuity in spreading the truth through emails, flyers, films, and strategic conferences like this one. So where do we go from here? In my eyes, there is nowhere else to be other than Ground Zero on September 11th, 2006, on Monday morning. We will not be there to scream the truth. Instead, we will be there to honor the memories of the fallen with both respect and solidarity. We will be wearing shirts that say, "Investigate 9/11." We will have signs that say, "We need a new investigation, 9/11 truth now," and ask questions, demand answers. We will be there to inform the firemen, the police, the family members, and the citizens that are agreeing to this information by giving away tens of thousands of our DVDs. We will be addressing everybody as sir and ma'am, as to be as polite as possible. This is the 5th anniversary of the lie that bases all of our foreign and domestic policy since then. We can no longer let this stand. Every major media outlet in the world is going to be in attendance, so if they want a wide shot, they will have to cover us. I am encouraging everybody to bring a camcorder to this event in case the government decides to provocateur it. If someone gets out of line, becomes disruptive, we need to turn cameras on them and say, "Stop it, you do not represent us." We will not allow them to squelch the truth this year.
Jason?
This is it. This is it. In closing, I would just like to say that I am doing this because I love my country, I love my family, and I love my friends. And anyone who doubts this information can go to seeloosechange.com right now and watch it for free. Now I'd like to introduce a man who has literally changed the minds of millions, my friend Dylan Avery.
Oh, stop. Thank you, everybody. I realize we're very pressed for time. We have a lot to get through, so I'm not going to take as much as I thought I was going to. I want to thank you all for showing up. Alex has put on by far the most successful, the biggest, and I think the most entertaining and most effective conference we've seen to this date. And I want to applaud you, Alex.
Thanks. Thank you.
I just want to put that out there because I mean it. I didn't want to waste time up here, but essentially, I started this whole thing as a kid who knew absolutely nothing. I knew nothing about the United States government and other governments and their long history of false flag sponsored terrorist attacks. I mean, United States government, Nazi Germany, they did both the same thing. I didn't know about any of these things. All I knew is that September 11th happened while I was in economics in high school. It was something that I knew I didn't really comprehend fully, and I felt like there was something that I didn't know. Apart from that, I didn't go into, as some of you may know, I went into this with the idea that it was fictional, that our government was not behind 9/11, it was just simply a crazy idea. I did my homework, it turned out to be true. So over the course of 2.5 years, it evolved from a feature-length film into a documentary. You all know the boring story.
Well, Dylan, thank you so much for being here. And you're going to be presenting today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I see a lot of familiar faces up the front. I want to get a few more comments. Barry Zwicker's here, media critic and also a journalist from Canada. I want him just to say a quick word. And then after that, simply put, we're going to have quick, simple questions, not because I know there'll be a bunch of political statements. I can see that lined up. I want a few questions for our presenters. We've only got a few minutes left. Barry?
I'd like to be very specific. I want to pick up on what Webster Tarpley said about the left gatekeepers. Chapter 5 of my book, which you can buy in order for, which you can pick up an order form for, is called "The Shame of Noam Chomsky and the Left Gatekeepers." Now, yes, they should be held to account. We could be a lot further ahead had these left gatekeepers done their job. But what I want to say to you today, I want to read off a list of these gatekeepers, and anybody here who is a subscriber to or a follower of any of these media, I ask you, either send them an article or send of your own, or send them an article that they can reprint, or send them an article idea, and demand that they pay attention to this. Here's the list. Just if you have anything to do with any of these, do this action now. It is The Nation, David Corn specifically, Amy Goodman at Democracy Now!, Chip Burlett, Senior Analyst at Political Research Associates, David Barsamian of Alternative Radio, Michael Albert of Zed Magazine, Alexander Coburn, Norman Solomon, The Progressive, Mother Jones, Alternate.org, Global Exchange, PBS, South End Press, Public Research Associates, Fair Extra. It's a wonderful magazine. I subscribe to it. Counterspin, Columbia Journalism Review, Deep Dish TV, Working Assets, Molly Ivins, Ms. Magazine, Interpress Service, MoveOn.org, and also Greg Palast and Air America. Now, I'm not speaking against these people. I'm saying it's time they woke up, but we have to help wake them up. So I urge you, contact them and ask them to wake up. It could make a huge difference.
Thank you, Barry. I'm going to get a minute comment from Jimmy Walter, the philanthropist that spent over $7 million on TV, radio, and print ads exposing 9/11 as an inside job.
I have a $1 million challenge to the official story that no newspaper in New York will print. I was protesting outside the New York Times. They called the cops. They threatened me. They lied about what I was doing. The New York Times is in on this and is actively suppressing it. 2, I'm paying $25,000 under the Freedom of Information Act to get the full NIST information that will be available to all of you soon. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Chris Hamill for the Martlet for the University of Victoria, British Columbia. Just a quick question here, open to all the panel. Clearly this goes beyond the idea of just Cheney and Bush. It's systemic, it's global. And within academic circles, there's a lot of academics who believe that this movement could lead to a systemic collapse of the social contract, let's say, within the United States and legitimacy of government. How do you avoid the tradition that when governments have collapsed in history, that there's a massive power vacuum?
Let me comment on that. Our government's already collapsed. A shadow government controlled by private corporate interest has already seized this nation. So we don't have a choice. It has collapsed. The Republic is basically on its knees, and they're about to slit its throat. Gentlemen, you want to comment? We need to move on.
I just want to
gentlemen, go ahead.
Can I finish the question,
election
actually?
after election using electronic voting machines. It can't get much worse. They've learned the lesson of Stalin. It doesn't matter who casts the votes. What matters is who counts them.
William Sloane Coffin in his dying days endorsed 9/11 Truth and said it could be an open door to social change. Rabbi Lerner of the Tikkun movement has said pretty much the same thing. 9/11 Truth basically knocks down the controlled environment, opens up real politics.
How do you prevent, though, when you're talking about the idea of a global elite, how do you prevent them from trying to fill in that power vacuum? There you go.
Duty is ours, consequence belongs to God. We do the right thing. Okay, that's what we do. We do the right thing, and letting this criminal group run things, I mean, we know that's bad, so we're doing the right thing. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Matthew Horton Woodson. I'm running for United States Congress as well. I plan to be with Mr. Bowman in the 110th Congress, and I would encourage everybody to open up their checkbooks to Mr. Bowman, as well as the other candidates that are running.
Fantastic. Sir, do you have a question? We're almost out of time.
I would say that I think that everybody needs to educate all the 3,000 candidates that are running currently in this country right now. So that's an action item that I would like to pass on to people. Thank you.
Comments on that, gentlemen? Would you like to comment, Bob, on educating candidates?
Absolutely. I'm working on that. We have a network of candidates around the country, and Matt Woodson, who just spoke, is one of them. He's Oklahoma's 5th district, and good for him.
Great. All right.
Okay.
Would either one of you like to comment on? Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. The question is, if there are only 2 legal ways to create change under the authority of the Constitution, Congress or Convention, and all the state applications are registered with Congress right now, why don't you guys start talking about the time that it's time to have an Article 5 convention?
Okay, thank you for the question. Let me comment on
cc2.org, charlie2.org. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for the plug. What I'm trying to state here is, historically, constitutional conventions have been good for the elite, bad for the people. I'm not saying it's a tool we can't use. It's just historically, in the last 100 years, especially with the Con of 1913, it's been very bad, and they've staged these. If they're stealing local elections, can you imagine what they'll do with the Constitutional Convention? But I'd like to hear the panel briefly talk about some type of Constitutional Convention.
This man has imposed his interpretation of the law 750 times. He has usurped to himself the powers of the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive together. If you don't see a dictatorship when it's right there staring you in the face. This idea that we're going to proceed in a gentlemanly way in accordance with the Constitution this administration has already suspended is simply absurd.
Yeah. We don't need to change our Constitution. We need to follow the one we've got.
Yes.
My name is Lynn Pence. I'm one of the founders of 9/11truthla.us and a convener of the Citizens Grand Jury on the crimes of 9/11. And we are convening another Citizens Grand Jury on the weekend of September 11th, on the 10th. We asked the entire nation, we asked C-SPAN to not only cover the whitewash of the 9/11 Commission hearings, which, quite simply, refused to consider evidence contrary to the Bush administration's official explanation or distorted evidence to conform to it. It ignored obvious suspects by failing to consider who had the means, motive, and opportunity to actually accomplish all that took place. And they determined it was outside their mandate to establish any legal responsibility or any accountability for the blatant disregard of standard operating procedures and the inexplicable negligence that permitted, if not caused, the atrocity known as 9/11.
Thank you so much. Do you have a question for the panel?
Well, yes. On the Fifth Amendment indicated that we, the people, are essentially the fourth branch of government. And we are calling on the people, not of the United States, but of the world, to have their governments hold this government accountable for the crimes of 9/11. And we're asking, and so I'm just asking the members of the panel, would you endorse, be a part of our Citizens Grand Jury, and stand for the reestablishment of the Fifth Amendment right for presentments, which are independent grand jury investigations and findings?
Absolutely.
Grand juries are a very effective tool.
We also call upon the district attorneys and the attorneys general in the states in which these crimes occurred to pursue the evidence. We'll present witnesses and expert testimony, documents, records, studies in support of it.
They brought Bill Clinton in, who I don't even like, get that straight. They brought him in over supposedly lying about Paula Jones for a grand jury. Cheney and Bush and the rest of them need to be brought into a real grand jury, and you can do that at the state or federal level, so start pushing. All we need is somebody like Jim Garrison.
Yeah, go to 9/11truthla.us. You'll get a sample of the presentments, the findings, and take that to your local grand juries. Thank you very much.
We've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to try to jam in 3 questions quickly.
Just one thing on this. We have Chavez of Venezuela, Mahathir of Malaysia have talked about an independent international truth commission modeled on the Russell Tribunal of Vietnam. That is the way you can break the back of the myth. And these citizens' grand juries are useful tools in an international propaganda effort leading up to an independent truth commission worldwide.
And I would just like to state on the record, the 9/11 hoax has been exposed. The WMD hoax has been exposed. And we're going to continue to expose all of these hoaxes. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Ken Knutson with 9/11 Truth of Arizona. It seems to us in Arizona and more broadly that we don't want to disrupt the rest of our lives. We want to get back to what we were doing before all this happened. We have 2 years to get this done, and then we can go back to having a real life again. So I want to get your comments on why that's important. We need to totally discredit this administration, and then we can go back to having a nice country.
That the people that carried out 9/11 control the leadership of the Democratic Party as well. I mean, you've got to understand. I mean, we've got Democrats jumping up even higher to attack Iran. So we need the left to really wake up to how disgusting their leadership is.
What we need is a legitimate election this year, this November. My great fear is they're going to try an event before that to interrupt it. If Americans vote their conscience, we'll reconstitute Congress, and we can help restore democracy to the United States of America.
All right. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Bowman talked about convincing America one person at a time. I'm a salesman, and I enjoy selling people on this at a grassroots level. One of the most frequent objections, or what I would call objections, you get from people who believe the official story when you're pitching them on this is, well, what happened to the original flights and the original passengers? You've touched on Flight 177. Dave Von Kleist has talked about Flight 175. I'd just like to hear the panel comment on what they believe happened to the original flights and the passengers, and what's the best way to respond to that when you're trying to pitch someone?
That's a long question. That'll be our final question. Let me just briefly state my view on this. My films don't get into the Pentagon. They don't get into areas that are open for debate. I stick with NORAD standing down, CIA drills, bin Laden being CIA, public officials being warned not to fly, and the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of points that show that the official story is a fraud, the bombs in the buildings, the controlled demolitions, Building 7. It's like police go and they find some guy who's got 10 dead bodies buried in his backyard. And he'll go to the electric chair, never telling people how he did it, why he did it, but they have all the evidence. They know he did it, okay? And you can convict them. So clearly, with the evidence we have, we could go into a court of law and prove that 9/11 wasn't carried out by who they claim it was. Then we can prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that criminal elements of the global military-industrial complex intelligence system were clearly involved orchestrating this. So I would challenge people to focus on the huge meat and potato issues that we have that are incontrovertible. That's my statement on that issue. Gentlemen, closing comments on that, and we will dismiss this section of the conference, and I want to thank C-SPAN for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, folks. Let's give them a round warm of applause. They did a great job, and so did you. So did you. Thank you. You can learn more at AmericanScholarSymposium.org. That's the organization to put that on, my organization, AmericanScholars.org. AmericanScholarSymposium.org. Thank you, Bob. Great job. Great being here with you guys.